Welcome back, you little speed freaks, to F1 Break Check. This is the podcast of lowbrow humor and even lower journalistic standards. On today's edition, we'll have an all-new biography of an F1 great, and we'll break down the news and preview the upcoming action from the Great White North. So stick around while we unleash the chaos that is F1 Break Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Break Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with F1 Break Check. My name is Scott Vick. I'm one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. It's been a busy week, man. I can't believe already we're sitting at Wednesday.
I know.
Unbelievable. Feels like
I'm telling you, it's insane.
it should be Saturday already. How about you? How's your week been?
It's same. It just busy as all get out, coming back from vacation and everything, trying to, and then, having the house all to myself last week. It's just been kind of this week with it, almost everybody back and stuff and work and everything else has just been pure chaos.
Right.
But I'm actually kind of glad that we are halfway through the week. We get to see each other on Friday for some bro time and everything. So super pumped about that. So ready to get into it.
Awesome. Right on.
All right, so let's jump into our biography for this week. In the golden age of Formula One, an era of unfiltered danger, raw talent, and the relentless pursuit of speed, a slender young man from São Paulo, Brazil, burst onto the scene with a name that would soon echo across continents, from the twisting circuits of Europe to the sweeping ovals of America. His name? Emerson Fittipaldi, and his story is the stuff of motorsport legend. Born on December 12, 1946, into a family already entwined with speed and machines, Emerson wasn't just destined for greatness, he was engineered for it. His father, Wilson Fittipaldi Sr., was a prominent motorsports journalist and commentator, and from a young age, Emerson was immersed in the world of motorsport. But while most boys his age were thumbing through comic books, Emerson was helping his older brother, Wilson Jr., build go-karts from scrap metal in the backyard workshop. By the time he was a teenager, the young Fittipaldi was already a master of improvisation and speed. In Brazil, where at the time motorsport infrastructure was sparse and Formula One was a distant dream, Emerson carved out his own path. He dominated local karting events, then moved on to motorbikes, speedboats, and eventually Formula V, where his flair behind the wheel truly began to shine. He wasn't just fast, he was symphonic. There was a rhythm to his driving, a harmony between man and machine that few could match. In 1969, at the age of 22, Emerson, or as he later became known as Emo, made the bold decision to leave Brazil behind and test his mettle in Europe. He arrived in Britain with little money, but a mountain of ambition. Racing in Formula Ford and Formula 3, he caught the eye of Colin Chapman, the enigmatic genius behind Team Lotus. Chapman saw in him what the world would soon discover, a rare blend of precision, fearlessness, and finesse. By 1970, barely a year after arriving in Europe, Fittipaldi was handed the opportunity of a lifetime, a Formula One seat at Lotus. It was a meteoric rise, one virtually unheard of. Most drivers spent years clawing their ways through the ranks, not Emo. His debut came at the British Grand Prix, and just 4 races later, in a moment of pure poetry, he won his first Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in the United States. At just 23, he became the youngest Grand Prix winner at the time. But this wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was the ignition spark of a career that would defy all expectations. Driving the beautiful black and gold Lotus 72D, Fittipaldi danced through the calendar with a grace that belied the brutality of the sport. He claimed 5 wins and at just 25 years old became the youngest Formula One world champion in history, a record that would stand for decades. To his rivals, he was polite, modest, almost disarmingly calm. But behind the visor, he was an apex predator. He didn't wrestle the car, he caressed it. A master of tire preservation and tactical brilliance, Fittipaldi's style was the very definition of efficiency under pressure. Yet success didn't lull him into complacency. In 1973, he defended his crown valiantly, finishing second to one Sir Jackie Stewart. But tensions began to simmer within Team Lotus, and Emerson, true to his independent nature, made a shocking decision. He left. In 1974, he joined McLaren, a team that had never before won a driver's championship. It was a gamble, but for Fittipaldi, risk was part of his DNA. The car, the M23, was efficient and fast, but very raw. Yet, once again, Emo turned potential into reality. With cool, calculated driving and a steely consistency, he clinched his second world title, delivering McLaren their first ever championship. He had now done the impossible. He'd won 2 titles with 2 different constructors, both times as the central architect of their rise. Then, in 1976, in what many consider the most bewildering move of his career, Emerson walked away from a top team and joined his brother's fledgling Fittipaldi Automotive. A dream, a passion project. A Brazilian team in Formula One funded by coffee sponsorship and a national pride. The car, however, was highly uncompetitive and the results extremely meager. But Emerson never saw it as a failure. He saw it as purpose. He was laying the groundwork for something greater, a legacy that extended beyond personal glory. Without Emerson, there would be no Senna. There would be no Piquet. There would be no other Brazilian greats. After retiring from F1 in 1980, many assumed Fittipaldi would settle into a comfortable life of commentary, maybe dabble in business, and bask in his legacy. But Emerson Fittipaldi was never built for stillness. After a 4-year break in 1984, at the age of 37, long past what many considered the twilight of a racing career, he crossed the Atlantic and returned to competition in IndyCar. What followed was nothing short of a renaissance. In the land of oval tracks and turbocharged V8 thunder, Fittipaldi found a second life. He adapted to the brutal physicality and tactical complexity of oval racing with shocking ease. In 1989, at the age of 42, he clinched the IndyCar Series championship. A year later, he conquered the mighty Indianapolis 500, joining the rarefied club of drivers who had mastered both Formula One and American open-wheel racing. He would win the Indy 500 again in 1993 at the age of 46, becoming a global motorsport ambassador, a living bridge between continents, styles, and eras. Even in retirement, Fittipaldi has remained active in racing culture, mentoring young Brazilian talent, promoting sustainability in motorsport, and appearing at vintage races, always with that unmistakable smile and that trademark poise. Emerson Fittipaldi's career is not just a tale of talent. It's a saga of reinvention, of breaking boundaries, and of refusing to be defined by the expectations of others. He didn't just race, he transformed the global racing landscape, proving that greatness could come from anywhere, that calm and humility could coexist with speed and fury.
That's awesome. So what made you choose him?
I've always been a fan of Emerson, and because Emerson, there had been, a couple of other drivers from Brazil who had competed, across the pond in Europe and everything, but Emerson was kind of the one who really, pushed Brazil to the forefront of motorsport. And like I said, without him, he literally paved the way for many of the greats, and he showed them that this could be done. You can take and go from the somewhat limited infrastructure in Brazil and become a world champion. But the thing is, though, is that I didn't become familiar with Emerson until after he had already left Formula One and was actually driving an IndyCar. And it was after watching him, his first win at Indy in what year was that again? 1990.
Okay.
The battle that he had with Al Unser Jr. during that race was just nothing short of spectacular. And
Yeah.
it was just, he always had such a, like I said in the biography, he always had such a calm demeanor, but he always had a smile. Even in, I believe it was 1996 when Penske failed to qualify for the Indy 500. It was an absolutely disastrous month of May for Penske. This is the Penske team that has won the race a record 21 times. Or I'm sorry, no, I apologize. They've won it a record 20 times. So I mean, it's just nothing short of spectacular what Penske has done at Indy. But even when in the failure of '96, even then, after he got over the initial shock, Emerson came back the following weekend at Detroit, huge smile on his face, ultra competitive, ready to compete. He was just an all around class act, and the milk incident after his second win uh, aside, he's always been a fan favorite, and so I thought that it was really important to highlight Emerson simply because of the road that he paved for other Brazilians to follow.
Nice, nice one.
All right. Stump the Pundit is taking the week off. For some reason, the lazy bum doesn't want to take work this week. So we're gonna jump right into the news today. So first of all, the F1 has released its calendar for 2026. So let's dissect the calendar. So Corey, have you gotten a chance to really look at the calendar yet?
Not in depth, no.
Okay. So I've gone through and I've looked at it pretty extensively for a couple things. So first of all, let's take and talk about the most brutal section of the schedule. So the last 6 races are going to be held in 2 triple headers, and we're basically going to have 6 races in the span of 7 weeks, which is just
That's gonna be
mind
crazy.
melting. It
Yeah.
is just insane how compact the tail end of the schedule is going to be and how tough it is going to be on the teams.
Well, I think it's gonna be dangerous for the drivers too. To have
Yeah,
that much going in that short of time frame with no
exactly.
breaks, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you start talking about the travel that's going to be involved as well, because we're going. Okay, so yeah, it's only 700 and something miles from Austin to Mexico City. But then from Mexico City to Brazil,
Yeah.
it's like something like 6,000 miles.
Yeah.
And although, they're only switching, I think it's maybe 2 time zones between Mexico City and Brazil, it's a lot of travel. And you've got those
It's a
3
lot of,
weeks
yeah.
compressed back to back to
That's right.
back, where you've got 3 very, very different tracks where you've got, Austin, and then you've got the high altitude of Mexico, and then the always present danger of rain in Brazil, especially in November.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 very, very different, elevations. Then you got literally 1 week off to come back to Las Vegas. And then from there, you go across. I forgot what the number was, but it's like, I think it's something like 11 or 12 time zones in the span of 4 days later to be in Qatar. And then, back in Abu Dhabi another week later. I mean, it is just, even though Formula One, has, gone to the effort of, most of the teams have multiple crews of mechanics and teams, so that they can switch them out, and
Yeah.
everything. But there are certain individuals, like the race engineers, the strategists, there's a lot of those kind of people though that they're at every single race, and they're going to be subjected to the exact same constraints and the exact kind of same pressures, maybe even more so than what the drivers are, because those individuals, a lot of them do not get to travel by private air, much like the drivers do. So
Right.
they're even more constrained by schedules and under even more pressure, and subject to much more fatigue. So it's going to be real interesting for the
Yeah.
for the tail end of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it's gonna be very interesting. I'm not a big fan of doing that because I like to see quality racing. And I'd rather them have time off so we can see that versus them having everything compacted. Obviously I like
Yeah.
to see, as much racing as possible, but I don't want to sacrifice the quality over the quantity.
Yeah, I would rather see them take like maybe a week out of the summer break, and so that way they could
Yeah,
stretch out the
right.
schedule a little bit more,
Oh,
maybe
I
have
have a
like.
good idea. They could remove Las Vegas.
Well, yeah, they could do that too, and I'm right there with you. I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to disagree, but
Yeah.
I would completely agree. And the fact that Las Vegas still has not, has not renewed its contract yet
Oh,
kind of gives me
wow.
hope. A little
Huh.
bit of hope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That maybe after 4 years we might be done with Vegas, but we'll see. One of the other interesting things about it, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, after the San Marino Grand Prix, is we kind of knew that we were going to probably lose Imola off of the schedule, which is what did happen. So there will be no Imola next year. Also, Zandvoort and the Dutch Grand Prix will be in its last year, and it's expected to be dropped as well. And then we also got the addition of Madrid. So we're going to have two races in Spain next year. So my first thought is that losing Imola is a big deal because Imola is one of those tracks that is so amazing that the thought of losing that track on a going forward is makes me very very sad because I love that track. I love it when I hated it when it got dropped from the calendar. I loved when COVID forced it back onto the calendar and we saw it's such an amazing track to drive for the drivers. It's a real driver's circuit and I love
yeah,
it. Madrid, I'm gonna hold off on that one until we actually see how that one
yeah,
goes off. More than likely, I'm sure that it's going to be just like the races at Miami and Las Vegas.
right.
First year it's going to have some teething
Yep.
problems, things
Which
like
is
that. So,
fine as long
yeah,
as the track itself is okay.
exactly.
You're not going to improve Las Vegas. There's just
No,
no way.
no, there's no way. And then, so I mean, with all of that in mind, so those are my thoughts on, on a couple of those things. And, and losing Zandvoort, that's another track that I like the track. I love the elevation changes. I love the old world feel to it,
Yeah.
but it is such a nearly impossible track to pass on unless you're Fernando Alonso. It's nearly impossible to pass on. The lap is excruciatingly short. But the one thing that was always so cool about the
Yeah.
Dutch
The
Grand Prix
wet.
though is the fact that because of its location on
Yeah.
the coast, the weather could just completely shake up the race in just literally within a matter of minutes. I mean, you could have sunshine, rain, back to sunshine, back to rain,
Yeah.
which was always made it such an interesting race. But,
Right.
I'm not really surprised that we're going to be losing it.
I'm less upset with Vanfort than I am Imola. We've discussed this before. I'd much rather Monaco, which we all know will never happen, but I'd much rather Monaco go than Imola. Imola is such a
Yeah.
class act. It's so from a driver's perspective, from a fan perspective, it's so much better. It's not
Yes.
boring.
I totally agree. Completely and utterly agree. But as we've discussed at length,
Yeah.
Formula One is still at the end of the day, Formula One, just like most racing series, is driven by money, and the money from Monaco just so far outstrips just about any other location that Formula One races at that
Yeah.
we're never going to lose it. It's always going to be there. Unless
Right.
the only way that I ever see Monaco being dropped from the Formula One calendar is if there is I mean, it would have to be some earth shaking event that would have to happen in order for that to ever happen.
Right.
So last couple things. First and foremost, I did kind of like the way that Formula One is trying to take and more quote unquote regionalize the calendar this year where it's like we've got the first three races in Australia, China, and Japan,
Yeah.
so we've got the Far East swing, first. Then they come back and then they do the Middle East, the first half of the Middle East swing through Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And then we go to Miami and Canada. So both races in North America. Now we'll come back to Canada in just a second because I also have a lot of thoughts about the location of Canada on the calendar next year.
Nice. Yeah.
And then we get to go back to Europe, and the entire European swing of the calendar is unbroken. So it's like we go through the entire, part of the European calendar. Part of the calendar is all together. So there's no more breaks over there, of going to like someplace like, Imola, and then going to Miami, and then back to, Monaco, and then back to Canada, and being so broken up. So I
Yeah.
really think that that's, that having all of those together is really good. And then we go to Azerbaijan, then back to Singapore, and then that brutal, string there, but where, the first four races are in the, Western Hemisphere, and then the last two races being, in the Middle East. So, but they're much more regionalized, which makes
Right.
that travel between some of the races
Not nearly
considerably
as
less. So
bad.
I
Yeah.
thought in that respect they did quite a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that, especially from a green initiative to where they're trying to save fuel and not have as much pollution out.
Yes.
So I know that that's something that they try to optimize, but still, the world's so large. It just, when you have races that close together, it just doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, completely agree. All right. And then the last thing I wanted to come back to is I wanted to come back to Canada. And I think that their timing, we knew, last year that when they said that they were rescheduling Monaco, that we knew that we were going to lose. They basically, F1 basically, is now the Grinch, and they killed the quote unquote motorsport Christmas, which was, a weekend that was always looked forward to by
Yeah.
racing fans around the world when you had on Memorial Day weekend for us here in the States. But you always had Monaco in the morning and this was always a great opportunity to showcase other motorsports to different fan bases and stuff, because you had NASCAR fans who probably maybe never watched any other
Yeah.
Formula One race during the year would get up early in the morning and would watch Monaco, and then they would watch the Indy 500, and then they would watch their race at night, and vice versa. You would have F1 fans, who are watching NASCAR races. You
Yeah.
had IndyCar fans who may not necessarily like Formula One, who were, but you had all three of these races in one day, and it was like Christmas for a motorsports fan. Now
I
that
like that.
Formula One has taken Monaco away, They've but stupidly they have scheduled the Canadian Grand Prix for the same day as the Indy 500, which is the dumbest
That
move
is
I
dumb.
think that they could have possibly have
Yeah.
made. And I know that they've said, "Well, we can't schedule it any earlier because of the weather in Montreal and everything," and I'm calling bullshit on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that they could have done it the week before, and the weather would have still held.
Yeah.
It still would have been late enough in the season that they could have raced 1 week earlier in May
Right.
in Canada. So because the problem that you're going to run into now is that Monaco, because of the time zone differences and everything, was always in the morning. So it made it very easy for motorsport fans to get up in the
Yeah.
morning, in at least in North America, to get up in the morning, watch Monaco. Then you'd have a little bit of a break, for maybe an hour or so, and then you would go watch the pre-race festivities from Indianapolis. You would watch the
Right.
entire Indy 500 this year. So, but basically next year, because the Indy 500 always starts at noon Eastern time, but in all likelihood, the Formula One race in Canada is going to probably start around 2 o'clock or so Eastern time, which is going to be probably about 2/3 of the way through the Indy 500. So you're going to have a lot of, I think F1 is going to really see a huge drop off
Yeah.
in North America viewership for the Canadian Grand Prix, because a lot of people are going to say, okay, I have the choice of watching the Indy 500 or Canada.
Right.
I'm going to stick, they're going to have already be watching the Indy 500. And they're going to be like, no, I'm not switching back over,
Right.
to watch the Formula One race. I'm going to continue to watch, I'm going to continue to watch the 500, and then maybe I might, you know, record the other one and switch over to it, or if the Indy 500 finishes early enough, maybe switch over and watch the last part of it. But it's not something I think a lot of fans are going to conscientiously leave the 500
Right.
to go watch the Canadian Grand Prix.
Yeah, I don't see that at all. I totally agree with you. I think that we'll see a very large drop in viewership because, I mean, let's be honest, most people couldn't name but maybe two drivers, maybe, in F1 in North America.
Yeah.
There's just that's that's bad. I wish I
Yeah.
could have done that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, there was some people who speculated that, well, maybe, Formula One was going to leave that weekend open, so that it would give more of their drivers who may have a desire to try to compete at the Indy 500. Because I know Alonso would
Interesting.
love to take, he's attempted it
Yeah.
a couple times. I
Oh
know he
well.
would love to give it another go, because he's got, he's come agonizingly close to winning the damn thing.
Right.
That I know that he's got that hunger to do it again. And I know that there's a couple other drivers, Max Verstappen aside, him being saying he has no interest in it, but
Right.
there are other drivers who have shown a lot of interest in attempting it, you know, that if, all F1 had to do was schedule Canada 1 week earlier, you still would have had that, week long
Yeah.
break, 2 week break between Miami and Canada, have it in Canada, leave that weekend open so that somebody had the desire to let them go race at the Indy 500. But I don't know, I think it was a stupid move um by Formula One to take and be that arrogant to take and schedule a race at the same time as the Indy 500.
Yeah.
And there was a really, really good article on The Athletic, that it's one of the things that they said in that article was is that motorsports right now is still, even though, F1 has such a global popularity right now and everything, it's
Right.
still such a small community compared
Yeah.
to a lot of the other stick and ball sports and things like that, that we can't have this kind of infighting. We can't cannibalize ourselves. Motorsports as a whole has to take and continue to say, hey, all motorsports is great. Whether it's, NASCAR may not be your thing, but it's still, you need to support, motorsports in general, whether it's sports cars,
Yeah.
Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, MotoGP, motorsports is motorsports. Everybody needs to take, try to help each other out as much as
Right.
possible. So, okay, I'm done. Off my soapbox. Today we got the news that apparently Lance Stroll, has put the kibosh on all the speculation in the fact of who was going to be in that seat uh, for the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend. That apparently his surgery is done. He will be back in the car for his home Grand Prix.
And the world
Now
of
that kind of put
F1
the
groans.
kibosh. Yeah, everybody, a lot of people have grown. But my conspiracy theory is it has taken a dent, but I am going to say that it's still alive and well in the fact that I think that he's trying to come back too quickly from this surgery, that I have a sneaking suspicion that after maybe FP1, maybe FP2,
Yeah.
they're going to make some kind of announcement that he is, he's dropping out for the rest of the weekend, and they'll put a different driver in for FP3. I don't know. And depending upon how that driver does, or they might, say, hey, we're going to run so and so during FP1, and then Stroll will run FP2 and then say, no, I'm still having too much pain. So that
Yeah.
other driver can, the drove in FP1 will be able to take and jump in for FP3 in qualifying and run the race. And then depending upon how they do, if they, just, drive lights out, then it takes and it gives Aston Martin much more fodder to be
Yeah.
able to say, hey, okay, would so and so, this person, did such a great job, they're available for the following, because Dragovich has said that, if given the opportunity between driving the car for Aston Martin or Le Mans, he's going to prioritize Aston Martin first and foremost.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Which
I don't
makes
know.
sense.
My theory is still very much alive and well. It's just taken a little bit of a hit. So your
Yeah.
thoughts though on Stroll announcing that he's coming back?
Yeah. I think this maybe is just a safe pace. I'm really hoping that he's not there for long term. I really hope that this is his last year. And, I was really hoping that this was, oh, look, I did something detrimental to my hand. I can't race at the level that I was before. I was hoping a story like that was going to develop. Now that it's not, I think they're kind of in a world of hurt right now because with him still in that seat, there's no way they're going to ever come close to constructors. And to be honest, once Alonso retires, who else is going to take that seat? Unless it's somebody out of desperation. I
Yeah.
don't see any quality driver wanting to race next to Lance Stroll. So now you're going, no matter how good your car is, nobody's going to want to be in it because of Stroll. So
Yeah.
you have, again, just like what we talked about on the last episode, you have all this talent, you've spent all this money, and you're not doing anything with it. What's happening?
No, I completely agree. The only thing that I can think of is that, like you said, this is kind of because this is Lance's home Grand Prix,
Yeah,
that I think that maybe what it is it's the team saying, okay, we're going to let you come back. We're going to let you do your home Grand Prix, and then you
right.
can start bowing out gracefully.
Yeah,
That's the only thing I can think of, is that if it were not Canada this week, first of all, I don't think that he would even be trying to rush back after the
yeah,
surgery if it wasn't his home Grand Prix this weekend. But, but secondly, like I said, is that even if it had been, the calendar had been slightly different and there'd been a race this weekend, and then we had, Canada, like say in 2 weeks, then I still think that he would have come back for his home Grand Prix, but then he would maybe start to take a bow. So,
yeah.
and that's kind of where my thinking is that I have a sneaking suspicion that, it'll be one of those things that, even if he makes it through the whole weekend, I have a sneaking suspicion that by the time we get to the next race, he's going to be not fit for driving or whatever. I'm doing
Right,
the air
right, right.
quotes here, but
Something will come up. He won't be able to race at the levels that he's expecting or whatever. Yeah. I
exactly.
hope that that's the case, but man, so far I've been really let down.
Yeah,
So,
I'm telling you. All right, so let's move on. Excuse me. All right, so did you see the news about Arvid Lindblad?
mm-mm.
Do you even know who Arvid Lindblad
I
is?
do not know.
Until this morning, I had no idea who he was either. So apparently, Mr. Lindblad is one, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. If I'm mispronouncing it, I do apologize. Please post something down in the comments and tell me how it should actually be pronounced. But this young man is a 17-year-old driver that is in the Red Bull Junior Academy stable. But Red Bull has, much like Mercedes was trying to do with Kimi Antonelli last year, because he's under 18, he has to get special permission if from the FIA to get a super license to drive in Formula One because he's under 17. And at the request of Red Bull, he has been granted a super license so that he can start participating in as a reserve driver. He can participate in FP1. He can start driving previous machinery for Red Bull.
Nice, yeah.
Uh, so there's a lot of people. I was not aware of him, and I don't know how I missed, because
Yeah.
I do try to keep up a little bit,
Right, yeah, yeah.
with the lower formulas and the up and coming drivers and everything. But it's like I don't know how I completely missed, this young man. But apparently this guy he's much like Antonelli and Verstappen, where there's a lot of people in the paddock who have had his name circled as a future
Wow.
superstar
Nice.
for a very, very long time. So it makes me kind of wonder if Yuki doesn't right the ship here pretty quickly, and Red Bull doesn't think Hadger's ready to make that step up, do they call him up and say, "Hey, give the kid a try"? I don't know. Your
I
thoughts?
hope not. Just because there's so much going on now, it's at what point do you say, okay, it's not the car, I'm sorry, it's not the
The
driver
driver.
something inside of the car. At what
Yes.
point, I mean, how many drivers really do you have to go through? It makes no sense to me. And even looking at Lawson, his driving dipped for what 3 races, 4 races. He's somewhat back to normal now, but I mean that takes a toll on somebody, from a mental aspect. So
Oh yeah,
that's just not
absolutely.
fair to do to somebody.
No, completely agree. I think that this would be a much different situation if they were to promote him to, the form, to the big boy team, as I like to refer to it.
Yeah.
Um, if they were to suddenly promote him, without any other time in Formula One, that's, a completely different situation from what Antonelli walked into at Mercedes. It's,
Yeah.
the Mercedes was, even though it is somewhat uncompetitive, it is not an impossible car to drive, and it
Right.
is not completely built around George. So Antonelli is able to put his input into the car, and he's
Yeah.
actually able to, and as we've already seen this year, he's been able to do really, really good things with the car. He's been fast, he's been consistent,
Yep.
whereas just about anyone who steps into that second Red Bull, they're dealing with a car that is completely built around Max Verstappen. And unless your driving style is a exact duplicate of Verstappen style, there's not a driver alive that is going
Yeah.
to, at least was right now that's on the grid, who is going to be able to take and be competitive in the car. I think Yuki's probably the closest of any driver, and even he's been struggling with it. So
Right.
I think that it would be a really, really bad thing for them to call him up. Now, maybe next year with the new regulations of the 2026 car,
Yeah.
maybe have him slot him in, as Max's teammate next year
Right.
when the cars are, and give them both an opportunity to drive a really, really new car instead of a car that has been completely and utterly tailored around one specific
Right.
driver.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know, man. I really hope that they give Yuki and everything that Christian Horner has said, he's still wanting to give Yuki a shot. So I'm hoping they
Yeah,
give him a little bit more time because, again, you're going through drivers more faster than you have them in reserve. So you
I'm
should
telling you.
be a little bit careful here.
Yeah. Yeah, drivers are not like underwear. You can't change them this frequently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because again, you get the reputation of canning people. People won't want to go there. At
Yeah.
least quality drivers won't want to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you get the reputation of, you become the career killer,
Yeah,
and it's only
exactly.
been through a lot of luck, dedication, and hard work from drivers like, Gasly and Albon and um who else am I trying to think of? But it's only been through, a little
Blossom,
bit of luck
really.
that that these drivers have said, okay, they've been able to resurrect their careers,
Yeah.
but there's been a lot of other drivers like Kvyat
Yep.
and, Ricardo and other drivers like that who, this has killed their careers.
100%.
So, I think that, if I think Red Bull should be really, super, you know, willing to, give him a lot of FP1 practice, to give him a
Yeah.
lot of other practice and everything, but otherwise, don't promote him just yet. So,
Yeah.
next item up on the rundown is there is been rumors that at Hamilton's request, because the car has not suited Hamilton. He's really struggled with it this year, over at Ferrari, that there are rumors that even at Hamilton's request, that Ferrari is looking to stop development on this year's car by the end of the month being June, and start focusing all of their resources and everything on next year's car. Your thoughts?
I think that's great. The car is good enough to keep their place where they are right now in the constructors. And right now, I don't see really Hamilton making too big of strides. In the car, his comfort level. So, you know, I think it's a probably a pretty good tactical call, especially for next year. It's setting everything up for next year. So that's my thought around it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As we talked about, I think we talked about this during preseason testing and everything. Ferrari made a switch on their uh, suspension to be more, to use the pull rod suspension, much like Mercedes and some of their other competitors and everything. And the experiment with the pull rod suspension it hasn't worked quite the way that
Yeah.
Ferrari had really hoped that it would.
Right.
And I think that, but at this point, to take and change back to the push rod suspension from last year is pretty much a non-starter. I don't think that, because there's so many other parts of the car that were adapted for the newer suspension that to
Yep.
revert back to the older suspension would be pretty much impossible anyway.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, then yeah, it's probably not a bad idea other than making, when they find some aerodynamic efficiencies and things like that, add those, few and far updates to the car. But you're right. I think that right now the car is good enough to keep them where they're at in the
Yep.
constructors, but I don't think that they're going to take. I don't think it's going to be like last year where they're going to make a huge leap forward, like they did
Right.
last year and really challenge McLaren for the constructors
Yep.
champion. That I think that yes, they would be very smart to take and just maybe not completely abandon the car, but definitely start pushing way more of the resources
Yeah.
over to next year's car to make sure that they hit the ground running as competitive as they possibly can.
Right.
All right, so we also got the news just in the last day or so that Formula One has decided that they will not be doing an F1 Live again next year like they did this year for their 75th anniversary. So they will be going back to much more of uh, a hands-off approach, and the teams will go back to doing their own car reveals and livery reveals starting next season again. And I, for one, say yay. I said back, preseason, I said the F1 live thing was kind of cool, but I said at the time, I really hope that this is a one-off thing. This is not going to become the norm. And thankfully the FIA was listening. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I like to think that they were listening,
Yep.
and have decided that yes, we are not going to be doing it again next year, which I say yay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that like what we were saying before on that podcast is just it was way overproduced, way overdone, and it didn't come off exactly right.
No, it didn't. And also, I thought that I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, some of the teams have done some way
Sure, yeah,
over the
yeah.
top reveals before. I mean, we've even talked about that. I think it was last season
Uh-huh.
on the here on the podcast. We talked about some of the the most over the top reveals and everything in Formula One in the past. I can remember some of them. Like the McLaren. One with the Spice Girls back
Yeah.
in the late '90s, or early 2000s. I can remember a lot of those. But I think that letting the teams take and dictate when and where they're going to take and do their reveal, I think is it's a good thing for the sport. It
Yeah.
allows the teams to take and kind of, you know, I hate this term, but it kind of lets them tell their own story. It kind of lets them set their own narrative and everything for the upcoming season. Whether they want to go low key, whether they want to go over the top, trying to generate sponsorship, or generate hype around the car. But it allows each of the teams to take and do it on their own terms
Yeah.
rather than having you saying, okay, you have this set, um, we have this set program, and you guys must adhere to this program and the way that we're going to present it to the world. And I think it's just a better all the way around by not having, doing it at the one time for Formula One 75th birthday. I think it's a great, was a cool thing, but they did it. It's been done. Move on.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You did this last year. You spent a lot of money on it. Not a whole lot of people liked it. Let's move forward.
Yes, absolutely. Without a doubt. Okay, so last thing for today. Let's take and talk Canada. So we already kind of hinted upon a couple things about this upcoming weekend in Canada. We've got a couple of things going on with Stroll and other things. So first of all, just any general thoughts that you have on this weekend. Like, who do you think McLaren's still going to be, just head and shoulders above everybody else? Or do you think maybe this, time off will have given some of the other teams a little bit of, time to refine the cars and close the gap? So your thoughts on just in general on this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, generally, I don't see anybody overcoming McLaren at this point. Yeah, I still would say that they're going to be podium. Both of them, Norris and Piastri, both will be on podium. Hopefully, Mercedes will come back, and clear up the woes that they've seen over the past couple of races. Definitely see, Max. Hopefully, Yuki will start coming back up as well. Hopefully, Max won't get any more penalties on his super license. What are your thoughts?
I'm of the same mindset that I think that McLaren is still going to be, the team to beat this weekend. I do think that they're probably going to be at the top of the timesheets, all weekend long. I pretty much see them, running away with the race just simply because the car is so good in race trim, regardless of what kind of track they're on. So I think it's going to be McLaren, and then, you're going to have Ferrari and Mercedes there to, kind of pick up the pieces, the crumbs that are left over. Max, I think that he's going to be on his best behavior, and because of that, trying to make sure that he doesn't incur the wrath of the Formula One this weekend. I think he's going to be maybe a little more sedate, maybe, I don't know. But then again, Max has never been one to play it safe. So, I'm just hoping that he doesn't run into any more situations, that are going to put him in jeopardy and everything.
Yeah.
I think that's, like I said before, when we were talking about Stroll, I think he's going to come in. He's going to be very energized, the fact that it's his home race, but I think he's going to come crashing back down very, very quickly. So I think it's going to be a very interesting weekend, and I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Like, we've had our 2 weeks off.
Yep.
Let's get back to racing.
Yeah, right on.
All right. So, real quick, your podium for this weekend.
Yeah, McLaren, and I'll go ahead and say I'll put Mercedes up there as well.
Okay.
No, I'll change that up. Not Mercedes, but I'll put Ferrari.
Okay.
Leclerc.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. See, I was already going with Ferrari this weekend, but I have a sneaking suspicion that just like, the 2 weeks off is going to give some of the teams a chance to, really work on the cars and really refine them. I think it's going to be a really good time off for Hamilton. And I'm actually going Hamilton will be on the third step.
Okay.
He will get his first Ferrari podium, in his, for his first podium as a Ferrari driver. So I'm going to say, Piastri, Lando, Hamilton.
Awesome. Love it.
Cool. All right, then. Well, I think we're done. Don't you?
I do.
So that is all the time we have for now. And Corey and I are going to go down some Labatt's and scarf down some poutine. Join us next week when Corey and I will break down all the action from Montreal in the Canadian Grand Prix. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.